Rome had just been born and already had problems. Romulus had traced the city's boundaries, had killed his brother Remus for mocking them, and now found himself with a handful of men who followed him, but no women to start families. The first Romans were shepherds, thieves, runaway slaves, and adventurers of all kinds. Rough people who had come seeking a new life, but all men. Romulus looked around and realized the obvious. A city without women had no future. There would be no children, no new generations. Rome would die with them. The problem was that neighboring peoples wanted nothing to do with the Romans. They saw them as a band of deserters and criminals. When Romulus sent ambassadors to request marriages with the daughters of the Latins, Sabines, Etruscans, and other nearby peoples, the answer was always the same: no. The elders of those tribes considered the Romans little more than bandits, unworthy of marrying into respectable families. Romulus pondered this dilemma. His men were growing impatient. Some talked of leaving, of seeking fortune elsewhere. The city that had barely begun was already crumbling. Then an idea struck him. Let's organize a great festival, he decided, a celebration in honor of Neptune Equester. They would invite all neighboring peoples with their families. It would be a celebration like they had never seen. His men looked at him strangely when he explained the idea. A festival? That was the solution? Romulus smiled. They would see. The Romans got to work. They built a great circus where horse races and athletic competitions could be held. They erected stands so spectators could sit comfortably. They prepared abundant food and good quality wine. Everything had to be perfect. Then they sent heralds throughout the region. The message was simple. Rome invited all its neighbors to a grand festival. There would be races, wrestling matches, banquets, and entertainment for the whole family. Entry was free and hospitality guaranteed. The neighboring peoples hesitated at first. Some elders were suspicious, but curiosity won out. They wanted to see what kind of city these Romans had built. Besides, it had been a long time since they'd had a good excuse for a celebration. The Sabines were the first to accept. They came down from the mountains in their finest clothes, bringing their women and daughters. It was an opportunity to show off their wealth and beautiful families. The Canaanenses arrived afterward, followed by the Antemnates and other smaller tribes. Everyone wanted to see the spectacle. On the day of the festival, Rome filled with visitors. The Sabine women drew particular attention. They were tall, fair-skinned from the mountain air, and wore jewelry that sparkled in the sunlight. Their daughters, young and elegant, walked beside them with that grace that only girls raised in abundance possess. Romulus received everyone personally. He showed himself courteous, generous, the perfect host. He offered the best seats to the most important guests, made sure they had sufficient food and drink, and conversed with the chiefs of each tribe as if they were old friends. It was an honor to have them in his city, he told them. He hoped this would be the first of many celebrations together. The visitors relaxed. The Romans seemed civilized after all. The city, though small, was well organized, and the festival promised to be memorable. The competitions began. Horses ran raising clouds of dust while the crowd shouted. Athletes wrestled and leaped under the midday sun. The Romans demonstrated they knew how to organize a good show. But Romulus had his eyes on something else. He watched the Sabine women, especially the young ones. His men had noticed them too. There were glances, discreet smiles, that kind of interest that naturally arises among young people. As the day progressed, Romulus gave secret instructions. He spoke with his captains, explained the plan, made sure each one knew exactly what to do. Everything had to go perfectly. The moment came during the most exciting race of the day. The horses galloped around the track, spectators had risen to their feet shouting, and all attention was focused on the competition. Then Romulus stood and adjusted his cloak. That was the signal. The Romans moved as if they had rehearsed for weeks, and perhaps they had. Each one knew exactly which woman to approach. They rushed toward the Sabines with speed, but without unnecessary violence. It wasn't a massacre, it was an organized kidnapping. The women screamed, of course. The Sabine men tried to defend themselves but were caught completely by surprise. They were unarmed, relaxed, trusting. The Romans, in contrast, had planned every movement. Titus Tatius, king of the Sabines, shouted treachery, but it was already too late. The Romans were carrying the women toward the interior of the city. Not all of them, only the unmarried ones and the youngest of the married women. Romulus had been specific in his instructions. No elderly matrons or small girls. They wanted wives, not spoils of war. One of the most beautiful girls, Hersilia, was led directly to Romulus. She was the daughter of one of the most important Sabine nobles, and had caught the Roman king's attention from the moment she arrived. He assured her he would do her no harm, that she would be his wife. The Sabine men regrouped quickly. They took what weapons they could find and tried to rescue their women, but the Romans had already closed the city gates. The confusion was total. Shouts, running, the sound of metal against metal. Titus Tatius managed to gather several of his warriors and tried to break down the gates, but Romulus had calculated well. The attackers were at a disadvantage, confused, separated from their families. After several failed attempts, the Sabines were forced to retreat. The Sabine king withdrew, promising vengeance. This wouldn't end here. The Romans would pay for this offense. Inside the city, the Romans tried to calm the kidnapped women. It wasn't easy. Some wept, others cursed, a few tried to escape. The Romans treated them with respect but kept them under guard. Romulus addressed all of them that same night. He gathered them in Jupiter's temple, the most sacred place in the city. He explained that he knew they were frightened and thought they were barbarians, but they hadn't brought them to harm them. They needed them as wives, as mothers of their children. Rome could be great, but only if they had families, only if they built a future together. Hersilia stepped forward. She was the bravest of the group, or perhaps simply the most pragmatic. She asked what would happen if they didn't want to be their wives. Romulus looked at her directly. If they didn't want to, they would remain honored guests until they changed their minds. But they should think, what life awaited them if they returned? Their families would see them as dishonored. Other men wouldn't want them. Here, they could be queens of a new city. It was a crude but realistic argument. In that era, a kidnapped woman could rarely return to her previous life. Her honor, according to the customs of the time, had been forever stained. The following weeks were strange. The Romans courted the Sabines with a mixture of respect and desperation. They offered them gifts, treated them delicately, protected them from any annoyance. Many of the women began to realize that these men, though rough, weren't the monsters they had expected. Some gave in quickly. Life in Rome, after all, wasn't so bad. They had their own houses, husbands who valued them, and the promise of being founders of something great. Others took longer to accept their new situation. Hersilia was among the first to marry. Her wedding to Romulus was celebrated with great pomp, and she became Rome's first queen. She didn't pretend instant love, but did show practical intelligence that would make her a respected figure. But while weddings were celebrated in Rome, war was being prepared in the mountains. Titus Tatius had spent months organizing an alliance. He convinced the Canaanenses and Antemnates to join him. The message was clear. If they allowed the Romans to get away with this, no woman would be safe in the entire region. Today it had been their daughters. Tomorrow it would be theirs. The first to attack was the city of Canina. Their warriors arrived at dawn, shouting for vengeance. But Romulus was already waiting for them. The Romans, strengthened by months of preparation and motivated by the need to protect their new families, fought with a ferocity that surprised their enemies. The battle was quick and decisive. Romulus personally killed the king of the Senenenses in single combat, and his men destroyed the attacking army. The survivors fled, carrying news of the defeat. Then came the Antemnates, and afterward the Crustuminians. The result was the same each time. The Romans not only defended themselves but counterattacked, conquering their enemies' cities and annexing their territories. Rome grew with each victory. But Titus Tatius was smarter than the others. He knew he couldn't defeat the Romans in open field, so he prepared a different plan. He had an ace up his sleeve. Tarpeia, daughter of the Roman garrison commander on the Capitoline Hill. Tarpeia had seen the gold jewelry worn by the Sabine warriors. The bracelets, rings, decorated weapons shone like little suns. Greed overcame loyalty. One night, she approached the Sabine lines. She offered to open the fortress gates in exchange for what they wore on their left arm. Titus Tatius smiled. The Sabines wore heavy gold bracelets on their left arms. It seemed a fair price for conquering Rome's most important fortress. He accepted the deal. Tarpeia kept her word. At the agreed moment, she opened the gates, and the Sabines silently entered the citadel. But when the traitor extended her hand to receive payment, Titus Tatius signaled his men. They had promised her what they wore on their left arm, he said with a cold smile. The Sabines didn't just give her their bracelets, they also threw their shields at her, which they also carried on their left arms. The weight of gold and bronze crushed Tarpeia instantly. Titus Tatius trampled the body. Traitors didn't deserve to live, he muttered. Not even when they served them. With the citadel in their hands, the Sabines had a commanding position over Rome. Romulus found himself trapped between the lower city, where he lived with his people, and the heights, controlled by the enemy. The final battle was fought in the valley that separated both positions. The two armies faced each other with all the fury accumulated during months of conflict. It was a fight to the death. Only one of the two peoples would survive. The Romans fought desperately. The Sabines fought for honor and vengeance. The battle lasted for hours, with attacks and counterattacks, neither side achieving a decisive advantage. It was then that something nobody expected happened. The Sabine women came out of their houses in Rome. Hersilia led the way, followed by all who had married Romans during those months. Many carried babies in their arms, children born from the union between the two peoples. They walked directly into the battlefield. "Stop! Enough killing!" shouted Hersilia. Warriors from both sides froze. Seeing the women, especially those carrying children, in the middle of battle completely bewildered them. Hersilia addressed the Sabines first. Were they going to kill the fathers of their grandchildren? Were they going to leave these babies orphaned? Then she turned to the Romans. Were they going to murder the grandfathers of their children? Were they going to turn these creatures into enemies of their own blood? Silence spread across the valley. The warriors slowly lowered their weapons. One of the youngest women then spoke with a trembling but clear voice. If they had to kill someone, let them kill her. She was the cause of this war, but they shouldn't allow brothers to fight against brothers. Titus Tatius dropped his sword. Romulus did the same. The two kings looked at each other across the battlefield. They had fought with honor, both had proven their courage. They had nothing left to prove. "Perhaps it's time to talk," said Titus Tatius. The negotiations lasted 3 days. In the end, they reached an agreement that surprised everyone. There would be no winners or losers. The two peoples would unite as one. Rome would become a single city with 2 kings. Romulus would govern the Romans, Titus Tatius the Sabines. They would share power, important decisions would be made jointly, and their peoples would mix until they became one. The marriages that had begun with kidnapping became the foundation of a new nation. The children of Romans and Sabines would grow up not knowing which had been their father's people and which their mother's. Hersilia, who had begun as a kidnapped woman, ended up being the first queen of a unified people. Her wisdom and courage on the battlefield made her a model for future generations. The city grew. The Romans learned from the Sabines the art of metalworking and military organization. The Sabines adopted from the Romans their ambition and capacity for adaptation. Together they became stronger than they had been separately. Years later, when Titus Tatius died in a dispute with another tribe, Romulus remained as sole king. But by then it no longer mattered. Romans and Sabines were the same people. The story of the rape became legend, told and retold around fires, but those who lived it knew that the true miracle hadn't been the kidnapping, but what came after, the capacity of 2 enemy peoples to become one, united by the love of their women and the future of their children.